bucka. Haha. You know the deal.
The next thing we're going to talk about in number sense is an introduction to fractions. And the first question you're probably going to ask yourself is, what is a fraction? And for our purposes, we're going to say a fraction describes part of a whole. So oftentimes when we're first talking about fractions, teachers like to talk about pizza. And pizza usually comes in the shape of a circle. So here I've drawn a circle, and the shaded part represents how much pizza is left. So if we look at this, and the shaded part is the pizza, then what we have here is one whole pizza. Now with our next diagram, again, if the shaded part represents how much pizza we have there, normally we would say, if you look at that, you would say that you have half a pizza. So what we have here equals a half. Now to write a half, we write a half as 1/2. So let's talk a little bit about where these numbers come from. And before we talk about where they come from, we're going to talk about what they're called. So we have our bottom number here. This number is referred to as the denominator. And the number that we have at the top is called the numerator. So next let's talk a little bit about where these numbers actually come from for this picture as an example. So if we look at the denominator, it is 2. And the reason that the denominator is 2 is because the pizza is cut into 2 equal-sized pieces. Here we have piece number 1 and piece number 2. Or if we go back to the original pizza, there's piece number 1 and piece number 2, both the same size. So that's the number that goes in our denominator, how many pieces a whole is cut into. The numerator is how many pieces we have left, so what we're representing. And here we have one of those pieces that's red. So that's why our numerator in this case is 1. So if I look at the next picture here, and I want to represent this as a fraction, well, I can see here that I do have one piece. Now, I might ask, well, can I make it 1/2? Because I do have 2 pieces here altogether. I have the one piece that's in red, and then the other piece over here, this whole white region. And so could I call this amount of pizza a half, or 1/2? And as you realize, that's not a half a pizza. So you can't call that a half a pizza. And the reason you can't is because right now the pieces aren't the same size. So in order to represent a value as fractions, we have to make sure that the pieces are the same size. And in order to do that, of course, we cut the pizza like that. And now we can see we have a total of 4 pieces. So in our denominator is going to go 4. And in our numerator here is going to go 1, because one of those pieces is shaded. Well, let's take the same amount of pizza we have in that example, but instead of cutting it into 4 pieces, suppose we cut it like this. So now instead of cutting it into 4 pieces, you can see it's cut into 8 pieces. And total amount of pieces we have shaded there is 2. So here we have our 2 pieces out of these 8 pieces that we have here. So we can see here, if we want to represent this as a fraction, well, in the denominator is the total number of pieces the whole is divided into, which is 8. So the whole pizza is cut into 8 pieces, and how many of them are shaded? Well, now we have 2 that are shaded, so that goes in the numerator. Well, if we look at the previous example compared to this example, you can see that the amount of pizza is the same. So 1/4 is the same as 2/8. It's just exactly the same amount of pizza. You've just cut it into smaller pieces. So we can say that the fraction 1/4 is equal to 2/8. And vice versa, you can say 2/8 is the same as 1/4. Well, since these three fractions are equivalent, as we can see from the picture above, let's take a look at the mathematical relationship that's going on here. So if 1 over 4 is the same as 2 over 8, it has the same value. And as we can see in these two examples, it's the same amount of pizza. If you have 2 out of 8 pieces, or if you have 1 out of 4 pieces, you have the same amount of pizza. If we look at the mathematical relationship between these numbers, well, 1 over 4 definitely looks different than 2 over 8. The numbers are different. So the question you have to ask yourself is, well, how did the numbers change? And here we're changing 1 to 2, and here we're changing 4 to 8. Well, in order to do that mathematically, to write equivalent fractions, one way we can do it is multiplying. And here we're multiplying by 2 on the top, the numerator is being multiplied by 2, and 2 on the bottom. So the denominator is being multiplied by 2. Well, similarly for the next example, 2 over 8 is the same as 1 over 4. As we can see in that diagram above, that's true. So you have to ask yourself, well, mathematically, how do we change 2 to 1 and 8 to 4? And in this case, we're actually dividing both of those values by 2. So we're dividing the numerator by 2. 2 divided by 2 equals 1. And we're dividing the denominator by 2. 8 divided by 2 equals 4. Let's go back to the first picture that we have here, where we show a whole pizza. And we can see that is a whole pizza. The whole thing is shaded. But if we wanted to represent that as a fraction, well, as we've talked about, in the denominator, we put the number of pieces that we have, that the whole is divided into, as long as they're the same size. And here there are 2 pieces that are the same size. And in this case, the amount of pieces that are shaded is 2. So we have 2 out of 2 pieces. In other words, we have a whole pizza. Since we have a whole pizza, normally if you look at a pizza like this, you wouldn't say I have 2 out of 2 pieces. You would say I have 1 pizza. So 2 over 2 is the same as 1. We're going to talk a little bit more about the mathematical relationship of why this is in the next video. But let's just focus on the fact that 2 over 2 is the same as 1 for a second, and go back to what we have at the bottom here, where we're multiplying 1 over 4 times 2 over 2. Well, as we discussed above, 2 over 2 is just 1. That's the same thing. When you multiply a value by 1, it stays the same. It doesn't change. Similarly, when you divide a value by 1, it doesn't change. It stays the same. And when we divided by 2 over 2, we were dividing by 1. And that's why 1 over 4 is the same as 2 over 8. Well, let's look at another example. Here we have, again, looking at pizza here. The shaded part represents how much pizza we have left. Let's assume these pieces are all exactly the same size. If we're going to represent what we have there shaded as a fraction, well, in our denominator here goes 3, because that pizza is cut into 3 equal pieces. And in the numerator, we'll have 2, because 2 of them are shaded. But suppose I decided to cut the pizza like this. Well, now, again, let's assume those pieces are all the same size. I haven't drawn it very well, but they're supposed to all be the same size. If you count the total number of pieces that we have there now, we have 12. And the pieces that are shaded now are 8. Well, as we saw just with the last example, the actual amount of pizza isn't any different, right? So mathematically, we can say that 2 over 3 is the same as 8 over 12. And 8 over 12 is the same as 2 over 3. So let's just explore that mathematical relationship we saw last time, where we have the same value here, but it's written in a different way. 2 over 3 is the same as 8 over 12, but it looks different. We have different numbers here. So how do we change 2 to 8? Well, as we saw before, we're only writing equivalent fractions by either multiplying or dividing. In this case, we're probably going to multiply. 2 times 4 is 8. And 3 times 4 is 12. And when we go the other way, to change 8 over 12 into 2 over 3, well, now we're dividing. 8 divided by 4 is 2, and 12 divided by 4 is 3. And once again, we can see as long as we multiply or divide the numerator and the denominator by exactly the same value, the fraction stays the same. And that's because, again, these values represent a whole. When you divide by 1 or when you multiply by 1, the value stays the same. So to finish off our lesson on an introduction to fraction, I just want you to answer a couple of questions here. So the first one is to represent the following diagram as two fractions. So just like the examples I did, you can see how many pieces that pizza is cut into, but imagine cutting it into more pieces. Just remember the pieces have to be the same size. And for number 2, fill in the blanks for the following, and those are equivalent fractions. So again, you have to look at mathematically how the denominator changes in this case, and then you would do exactly the same thing to the numerator. If you're able to answer those, congratulations, you now have a firm understanding of an introduction to fractions.